Welcome once again, What the Fuck Is That fans? This is the video we've been talking about now for quite some time and been really hyping this past weekend. The Kurt Cobain, evidence reveal. I'm the Dark Druid Joel Walling. With me, as always, is the Light Seeker Michael Smith. And Light Seeker, tell them what you got.
Okay. I first looked at this case file starting about the 1st of December. And like I said before, all I knew about this case was that it involved Kurt Cobain and his death. I didn't know anything about Mr. Cobain, really, except that he was a singer and that he had died. And I went into the case file with as open a mind as possible, just looking for whatever I could find. And I truly did not expect to find anything, only because it had been looked at for so many years by so many people that honestly I didn't think there was anything there to find. I was just, we were doing it for information and for the show, and so that's where we're at. I did, however, find a contradiction in the report that I think is pretty substantial. When Mr. Cobain and Mr. Carlson bought the shotgun that was used in this incident, they also bought a box of shotgun shells. This original box of shells was given to the cab driver that took Mr. Cobain to the airport when he left to go to rehab. He knew he couldn't take him on the airplane with him, and either he'd stuck him in a bag or something, but he forgot he had him with him, so he had to get rid of him. So he gave him to the cab driver. The cab driver contacted the police and told him that he had him if they needed him. He'd be glad to bring him in. There was nothing in the case file that showed that the police ever contacted the cab driver or examined the shells that he was given. If they were, or if this was done, we don't know it. There was no follow-up in the case file online that indicated this. The Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory report, dated on May 18th of 1994, they received for examination the following items, and I'm going to read these off the report. And the numbers in front of these correspond to the evidence report in the Seattle Police Department. Item number 8, one Remington Model 11 shotgun, 20 gauge, self-loading, semi-automatic shotgun, bearing serial number 1088925. Item number 10, one fired Winchester AA 20 gauge, 2 1/2 inch length shot shell. This report is dated May 18, 1994. So this is, in essence, saying that the shotgun shell that was used in the gun when Mr. Cobain allegedly committed suicide was a 2 1/2 inch length shotgun shell. The crime scene photos, however, and there are numerous ones, are Winchester AA 20 gauge, 2 3/4 inch length. This is a rather large discrepancy because it can only indicate two things. Either the crime lab didn't measure the shotgun shell right, or they didn't measure it at all, which in my mind could draw all the forensic evidence into question.
Well, I mean, it would. It's if something like a shotgun shell being measured, it being a typo and then not double checked. That's one of the things we've got to point out with this is out of the 1,000 pages that are in this report that's available online, there's going to be a link in the video, a link in the description box. The discrepancy of the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab and the evidence from the pictures of the scene of the crime and from the statements from the police officers themselves never is addressed. This was left in the file for over 20 years and never addressed. This clearly shows that there is a flaw in the forensics that needs to be relooked at.
Yes, there are only two options here. Either the technician measured the shell correctly and wrote down the wrong thing, or he measured it correctly and wrote down the correct thing. If the shells, well, I'll just put it simple. If the shells in the gun from the first box were 2.5 inches in length, if they were loaded into the gun by Mr. Cobain before he gave the remaining shells away to the cab driver, and the shells on the scene were 2 3/4 inch lengths, which is indicated by the numerous crime scene photos. That box, the 2 3/4 inch box, had 3 shells missing. If there are 3 2.5 inch shells in the gun and 3 2 3/4 inch shells missing from the box on the scene, that means that someone else was there at the time of Mr. Cobain's death, and after having realized that the gun was already loaded, took 3 shells from the box and left the scene with them. Because there are 25 shotgun shells in a box like that. There are 22 accounted for in the box, as listed on in the police department evidence list. There are 2 unfired shells and 1 fired casing. That makes 25.
Yeah, it's actually in the police report where the guy counts it. I counted 22 shells in the box, 2 live shells in the shotgun, and 1 spent casing. The box contained 25 shells. So it's actually counted down in the police report.
So either the crime lab made a simple typo and all the shells that were used were in fact 2 3/4 inch, and the crime lab doesn't know how to measure a shotgun shell, or else there are 2 separate boxes of shells with different lengths. And if that's the case, because 3 of the 2 3/4 inch shells were missing, someone else had to be at the scene to remove them, because they were not found on the body. They were not found on the scene. So someone else had to be on the scene of that incident to remove those 3 shells from that box so that the number of shells equaled 25. The only way to know this for sure is to go into the Seattle Police Department evidence room and measure the shell casing that they have, if they still have it, and see what it measures. If it measures 2 3/4 inch, it means the crime lab made an error. If it measures 2.5, it means that there was someone else on the scene. Until that is done, you're not going to know which one it is. In any event, the fact that the crime lab listed a different size of shell from what was noted on the scene in many photographs.
You have actually seen those photographs in this video. Those are actually crime scene photographs available, again, for download from the Seattle Police Department itself.
I use nothing except the Seattle Police Department case file that was put online by the department. I use no other outside paperwork from anybody else. Matter of fact, I took great pains not to read anybody else's information. I wanted to read the police report and nothing else. If there are other parts of the report that I haven't seen, it's because they're not released. There may be more paperwork that for this case that's on file that we haven't seen. If there is, I don't know about it. I can't look at what I can't look at what I don't have. But that's what I found.
But out of what's available online, which is a PDF including all depositions from the family and various lawyers about the crime scene photos and the photos dealing with the actual victim's body, 2 notebooks is what they're called. One is Notebook 1, it's 195 pages, and the other one is Notebook 2, it's 600 and I'm thinking 97 pages. Don't quote me on that, I'm not positive. And a zip folder containing all released crime scene photos. Everything you've heard today, everything we've talked about in it, all of that comes strictly from those files. I think it's a total of two zip files and 4 or 5 PDF files, including case files and depositions from the court.
It's almost 1,000 pages of document, and there were other inconsistencies that I found, and we'll cover those in a different show. But these ones, the 2 here, were the most glaring.
Well, I think the reason we had to do this one separate, and I want to get this one out so quick, and you do too, of course, as I've told a lot of people I've talked to online, we had to do a lot of soul searching of releasing this versus contacting the proper authorities first. The light seeker is the conscience of the group and won out, and we did contact the Seattle Police Department last week. We still have not heard back from them, so it's been a week. Now we're releasing the video. But the reason these are such big is because it boils down to one simple thing. You have to reopen the case to reinvestigate the forensics. That's it, pure and simple. You cannot leave it setting with 2 different measurements. You have to reopen the case and remeasure the shell. If the shell is a typo, then it brings all the other forensics to question. If they can't measure a simple shotgun shell, how did they do fingerprints? How did they test for DNA? How did they do all of this stuff? If they can't measure a shotgun shell, the rest of it is all in question. And then you have what I personally think may be. You have 2 different size shells. If that's the case, then it turns it from a clear-cut suicide, as Seattle calls it, to a very shady possible murder, because you have proof of a second person at the scene. And regardless of what the findings are, you still have the fact that the only way to deal with it is to reopen the case and investigate the forensics again.
And pretty much that's it. I mean, that in a nutshell, that's what we found. And I'm surprised I found it. But Joe and I take credit equally for everything that we do. If one of us finds it, we both find it. We pour through information and data. We're always back and forth. And we don't always agree on what it means, but if we find it, you get it. And I personally don't use just any source for my information. I have to use, in my mind, for me, what is a qualified source. In this case, it was an actual police file that had been released because they had so many Freedom of Information Act requests for this case file that they felt it prudent, because they didn't want to have to deal with all the paperwork involved. Every time somebody files, they have to go through a procedure to get it released.
Yeah, according to the actual site, it says that this was actually released May of 2014, near the 20th anniversary of his death. and they said, knowing that the 20th anniversary was coming up, they were going to have the case re-evaluated by a cold case detective, which decided to leave it closed and release it to the public through their website, because they knew the amount of Freedom of Information Act requests that were going to be coming in, and it was just a way of heading that off. So instead of having to file each one, they say, hey, go to this website, download it, it's yours.
So I don't feel bad. I mean, if they didn't want somebody to look at it, they shouldn't have put it online. And I'm not a police officer. I'm not a detective. I have had some minor training. I did teach legals and the laws of arrest to private security officers, so I did go to the police academy for a short amount of time, and that was many years ago. So I'm not claiming to be a police officer or a detective, but the job that I had for 6 years before my disability, I was more or less, I looked at data. I looked for changes in data, and that's what I did. And that's all this is. This is comparing one thing to the other, looking for an anomaly, and that's what I found in their own report. And it had been there. It had been there for 20 years, and either nobody read it, nobody caught it, or if they did, they didn't note that they fixed it. So this is our reveal. This is what we found. And like I said, there are more things. There are many, many inconsistencies in this case. Most of them circumstantial, but even still, there are so many that we've actually had a hard time trying to find out how to list them all in order to make it make sense. But this was the big one. This was the biggest one we found. With the error on the forensic report and the possibility of a second individual on the scene, I really don't see any other way to clear this up unless the case is reopened, the forensics are re-examined, and a determination made. Now that's going to be difficult because in this case, much of the evidence has been destroyed. The firearms were melted down.
Yeah, actually, I guess that's a good thing to say. The firearms have been melted down. The original notes that were on the scene have been destroyed or are missing. The actual scene of the crime itself has been destroyed. So the body was cremated. So literally, except for what's in the Seattle Police Department's evidence lockup, which according to them, they did keep a lot of the evidence because they knew that this is a case, if I'm quoting them correctly, it said they knew this was a case that was going to be talked about and looked at many times over the coming years. So they did leave a lot of what they had in evidence alone. The problem is they did release the gun, back to Courtney to be destroyed. She never actually took possession of it or anything. That was given to a charity and it was melted down. Of course, they did release the body. She had it cremated, which that's common. When my mother died, I had her cremated. I mean, that's just, that's something that people do.
Yeah, I did as well. That was what was done. But we also must note here that the same crime lab that apparently, if it's a typographical error, the same crime lab that doesn't know how to measure a shotgun shell is also the same crime lab that did the handwriting analysis on the supposed suicide note. So,
and did they do the fingerprinting as well?
I think the Seattle PD did the fingerprinting.
Okay, so at least they had control of the fingerprints, but they did the ballistics on the shotgun and the handwriting analysis of the suicide note.
Yes. And so, I mean, if in my mind, this this discrepancy calls the forensic evidence in this case the methodology into question, and
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah, absolutely. Because, well, it's just as simple as this. One of the two has to be right. Or, in this weird case, both have to be right. But the thing of it is, as long as that discrepancy is there, the way I looked at this case was like you're doing something in a court of law. They say in order for you to find somebody guilty, they have to be guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. Well, this is a pretty big damn shadow. You actually have two different sized shells. That is clearly stating there is something wrong here. Either it's a typo that has never been addressed, or there are two shells, meaning two people, because somebody thought enough to go, oh crap, the gun's already loaded. Well, I'll take 3 with me, because those 3 shells have never been found.
if Mr. Cobain had bought the second box of shells, if he'd forgotten he loaded the gun and bought the second box of shells, no harm, no foul. That would explain the two different sizes. What it wouldn't explain is the fact that there were 3 missing from the box.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I kind of I've missed the point. I've not missed the point, but I've kind of have not addressed that point. It's not so much of the 2 size shells, but it's the fact that there would be 2 size shells with 3 missing. That's where it comes in, because had he forgotten to have whoops, I loaded the gun. I didn't need these shells. There would have been 25 in the box.
Yeah, it would have just been an unopened box of shells.
Yeah,
with two in the gun and 1 empty. With two in the gun and one empty casing. But that's not what we had. We had 2 in the gun, 1 empty casing, and 3 missing, which is what you would expect to find if the 3 shells had come out of the box that you just used.
But if the 3 shells happen to be 2.5 inches and not 2 3/4 inches, that's where you have a problem.
And I think, as far as our reveal, I think we did it.
I think that's all we can do with it. If you have any other questions, of course, we're on Google+, Twitter, Facebook. I even post stuff on Reddit. Here on YouTube, you can email us, ask us. We will talk to you. It doesn't matter if, what it's about, how you might think, oh, this isn't worth doing it. Ask us anyway. We'll be glad to talk to you, give you any information we can. Again, there are going to be links to this in the description box and the video, as well as the page and page number of the ballistics lab and the pictures of the crime scene. So let's get this out. And this has been the Dark Druid, and with me once again is the Light Seeker Michael Smith. We'll see you again soon.